The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has established an international reputation for scientific management of trout streams. A foundational component of this management responsibility is an emphasis on sustaining thriving populations of wild trout for anglers to enjoy. One of the major management tools to accomplish that goal is an innovative, well-funded program to preserve and, where necessary, restore the kind of healthy trout habitat needed by wild trout. The purpose of this program is to summarize in a visual format a 10-year research project carried out at Lawrence Creek in central Wisconsin to evaluate the effectiveness of using one of the habitat restoration techniques pioneered in Wisconsin to provide better living conditions for trout and improve the sport fishery. Lawrence Creek is a 3.4-mile-long trout stream located a few miles west of the town of Westfield and about 50 miles north of Madison. The stream holds a good population of wild brook trout. Most of the stream and watershed are publicly owned and managed by the DNR, except for a 400-yard reach of stream at its lower end, where it enters the Lawrence Lake flowage. Only 2 county roads cross the stream. High-quality groundwater input via 2 tributary headwater branches and numerous spring seeps throughout its length nurture an excellent water temperature regime and stable flow throughout the year. One of the unusual features of the research project was incorporation of a mandatory creel census. All anglers planning to fish the stream were required to obtain a free daily fishing trip permit by stopping first at the DNR research station located near the stream. Permits were restricted to one of the 4 study sections chosen at the option of anglers. After completing their fishing trip, anglers were required to return to the research station, present their catch for examination, and supply other related fishing trip information. 4 study sections were established, designated A, B, C, and D, proceeding downstream. Natural reproduction of brook trout was concentrated in the upper 2 study sections where gravel substrate suitable for spawning was most abundant, and groundwater input was also greatest. Some spawning was also successful in the other 2 study sections. Habitat preferred by adult trout was good to excellent in the lower 3 study sections, but only poor to fair in the upper mile-long section where pool habitat and underbank hiding cover was sparse. This section, designated Section A, had reestablished a healthy riparian zone after public acquisition that eliminated damage done by cattle and other farming operations, but the damaged stream banks and channel were still in poor condition when the 10-year research project began. The experimental design of this study consisted of 3 phases: a 3-year pre-restoration phase, a 1-year interim phase when habitat restoration was carried out, and a 6-year post-restoration phase to document physical changes in the stream, changes in the aquatic invertebrate community, and changes in the trout population and sport fishery. Each April before the fishing season began, and each September near or after the end of the fishing season, the brook trout population was inventoried with electrofishing gear. The number, size distribution, weight or biomass, and age of trout were quantified by inch groupings in each 100-yard reach of stream in each of the 4 study sections. Trout captured in September that were less than 1 year old were permanently marked by clipping 1 or more fins. This process established a known age population and helped to keep track of movement from one section to another. Documenting such movement was especially important to determine whether the expected increase of brook trout in Section A, the section chosen to evaluate restoration of better habitat, was largely due to better survival and more spawning in that section, or due largely to movement into Section A from the 3 downstream sections. During the pre-restoration phase, detailed maps were constructed of the stream channel in Section A and the adjacent Section B reference section. These maps were drawn to a scale of 1 inch equals 25 linear feet of stream channel. These elegantly drawn maps provided unprecedented quantitative measurements of several environmental features that influence trout carrying capacity. Within each 100-yard study section of sections A and B, physical variables quantified included average channel width, average depth, surface area, water volume, substrate type, area and maximum depth of each pool, and the linear feet of underbank cover for trout. Mapping was done during March and April when trout habitat was judged to reflect its poorest condition during the year. 2 years after completion of the intensive habitat renovation project in Section A, another series of comparable stream maps was made to determine how much the physical features of Section A had changed. Section B was also remapped to measure natural changes since it was last mapped. Another phase of the evaluation study consisted of collecting samples of the aquatic invertebrate inhabiting sections A and B. Sampling was done each month during 1 year of the pre-restoration period and 1 year of the post-restoration period. Within each section, a randomly determined sampling site was selected within each 100-yard station. A specially designed sampler was used that enclosed 1/4 square foot of substrate. The tube-like sampler prevented invertebrates within the sample area from escaping. Collected samples were labeled in the field as to date, site, and substrate type. Later, at the research station, samples were pickled until they could be taxonomically sorted and enumerated. When the stream morphometry maps of Section A had been analyzed, it was clearly evident what two physical features were depressing trout carrying capacity, especially for adult trout of interest to the anglers. Only 4% of the stream channel provided pool habitat preferred by adult trout, and only 5% of the stream bank edge provided essential year-round protective hiding cover. Fortunately, both of these limiting habitat features were amenable to corrective adjustment through application of one of several restoration techniques. The regional DNR habitat management biologist, in consultation with the research project biologist, quickly agreed on the best restoration technique to apply: installation of a series of bank covers throughout most of Section A. These structures would simultaneously restore its reduced meander pattern, narrow and deepen the stream channel, scour away some sand and silt covering gravel substrate that provides preferred habitat for invertebrate insects and spawning habitat for trout, build up firmer, more erosion-resistant stream banks, and greatly increase pool habitat for trout and protective underbank cover. Working as a team, the habitat manager and research biologist walked the entire length of Section A to plan and record on copies of the stream maps where the needed bank covers should be installed. During the summer, prior to the start of field work to do the installations, the DNR construction crew assembled and stockpiled structure building materials along the banks of Section A. Included in this effort were 6,000 tons of rock, 38,000 board feet of green-cut oak planks, and hundreds of 5 to 6 foot long wood pilings. This artistic schematic drawing portrays the anatomy of the bank cover structure chosen to rehabilitate the trout carrying capacity of Section A. In the foreground, a pair of wooden pilings has been embedded in the stream bottom. A powerful jet of water emitted from a pipe is used to bore a hole into the sandy substrate for insertion of each piling. The next step is to nail a stringer board on top of each pair of pilings. These boards extend outward from the natural bank. Next, a series of longer 3-inch thick planks are nailed on top of the stringer boards to complete an underwater platform. Along the front edge of the platform, a quarter-round board is then nailed in place to provide a lip-like brace to prevent rocks added to the top of the platform from rolling off. A row of large rocks is then aligned by hand along the outer edge of the platform just behind the quarter-round. A mix of rocks and dirt is then added to cover the remainder of the platform and taper the new bank back to blend in with the contour of the natural bank. To complete the structure, a top dressing of field sod, dirt, and grass seed is added. This second schematic provides an overhead view of a pair of bank covers installed to work synergistically. Note that the downstream portion of the bank cover on the right curves more sharply outward to guide most of the flow across channel toward the second bank cover. Note also that the downstream end of the structure on the right overlaps the upstream end of the structure on the opposite bank. This overlap positioning reduces the likelihood of diverting flow ahead and behind the structure downstream. Each structure helps to restore a natural meander pattern to the stream channel. Most of the stream flow, now confined by the meandered channel, flows under or just along the outer edge of the bank covers. Lateral scour pools have been created under the length of most of each structure. The carrying capacity of these pools is enhanced by providing protective cover over part of each newly created scoured-out pool. Let's look now at an actual on-site construction of a typical bank cover structure. Step 1. Based on map directions, a series of temporary stakes is placed in the stream to outline where the bank cover's outer edge will start and end. Step 2. Paired pilings are jetted into the bottom. Step 3. Stringer boards are nailed in place on top of the pairs of pilings. Step 4. Platform planks are added. Step 5. Large rocks are hand-fitted along the outer edge of the platform. Step 6. More rock and dirt are dumped on top of the platform to build the new stream bank. Step 7. A mat of sod is added as top dressing to prevent erosion and speed up creation of a new riparian zone of grasses. "170 such bank covers were installed in the mile-long Section A. Most of them were placed in pairs. Where a good natural pool on a bend was already present, only one new bank cover would sometimes be necessary, installed just upstream and across from the good natural pool. This visual perspective of Station 2 provides a dramatic contrast of how bank covers transformed a reach of stream. Average channel width of this 100-yard reach was reduced by 65%. Average water depth increased by 97%. Pool habitat increased by 248%, and hiding area under the bank covers increased 550%. The trout population responded favorably to these changes. The number of brook trout in April increased an average of 143% during the post-restoration period, reaching an abundance of 1 trout per linear foot of stream. A reach of Section A hardly worth fishing was transformed into a reach providing nearly continuous, fishy-looking habitat throughout its length. For Section A as a whole, this figure provides a summary of how 8 of its physical parameters changed. Surface area was cut in half. Average water depth increased 65%. The volumetric shape of the channel decreased by 1/3. Although no measurements were made to determine how stream velocity changed, it is reasonable to assume that scrunching the flow into a smaller volume of space should have increased the speed of flow down the channel. This supposition is supported by a measured increase of 11% in the amount of exposed gravel substrate and reductions in silt and sand substrates. Additional spawning was observed on some of the gravel uncovered. Abundance of the most important trout food item, case-building caddis, increased by 70% in response to greater attachment area provided by increased gravel and wood components in the bank covers. Most important and most prominent of the changes in physical features of Section A were the increases in pool habitat and hiding cover under the bank covers. Nearly 300% more pool habitat and more than 400% increase in protective cover preferred by adult trout. This bank cover component was arbitrarily defined as bank edge extending at least 6 inches over the stream channel and having at least 12 inches of water beneath the edge. Most of the newly created cover greatly exceeded this criterion by 2 or 3 feet or more. The number of brook trout in the renaturalized section increased steadily, due primarily to improved overwinter survival. The standing stock of brook trout in April increased from a pre-restoration average of 1,747 to 2,571 after 1 year of renaturalization. Then, in successive years, abundance increased to 3,325, a bit of a decline the next spring to 2,648, then upward again to 4,044, then to peak abundance of 4,327, and about the same abundance the last year of study when Section A held 4,306 trout in April. This next chart shows how abundance of legal-sized brook trout changed. Trout over 8 inches were present in an average abundance of only 118 prior to habitat enhancement. During the 6 years of follow-up study, legal-sized trout substantially exceeded that pre-restoration average and peaked at 471 the last year, an increase of nearly 300%. As shown in this figure, angler use almost doubled in Section A after renovation of its habitat. By contrast, fishing effort in the other 3 study sections declined 20%. Harvest in Section A increased almost parallel with the increase in angler use, a 191% average gain. Harvest increased modestly in the remainder of the stream by an average of 22%. This figure illustrates another change in the sport fishery. Prior to restoration of Section A, only 19% of the anglers registering to fish chose Section A. That choice changed to 46%, or nearly half of all trips to Section A. Anglers liked the habitat improvement accomplishments. This brief review of one case history example of applying scientific management principles to reverse a downward trend in trout carrying capacity is currently being replicated to refurbish about 50 miles of trout streams in Wisconsin each year. The specific technique used in this case history continues to be one of the most popular and effective restoration tools, but site-specific diagnosis of in-stream habitat, health of the riparian zone, and health of the larger watershed are all critical criteria brought to bear when a remedy prescription is written. Whether this prescription is applied to an entire watershed and stream, or confined to only the stream and its riparian corridor, the management goal is the same: restoration of healthy habitat for wild trout that supports a sport fishery for happy anglers.